Hello to you. I do hope you're well. Welcome to this AQA A-Level Religious Studies revision video. I'm Ben Wardle, and today we are talking about virtue ethics. So we are going to cover everything you need to know about virtue ethics for the Paper 1 Philosophy of Religion and Ethics exam. So plenty to talk about today. A really fascinating theory, and one that is very, very unique, I think, in terms of its focus on the person within. So it's all about, of course, the development of those virtues within you and ensuring that you become a virtuous person, as opposed to being too focused or focused at all, to be honest, on the rules that you need to follow. So yes, a very unique theory and a very interesting one for us to be studying. Now, I thought the best place for us to start before we deep dive into the key AO1 and AO2 content is in terms of what does virtue actually mean? Do you know what I mean? Let's start by actually establishing what we mean when we talk about virtue ethics. And so here is the definition for you. A virtue is a settled purposive disposition located in the mean, the golden mean to be precise, and being determined by right reason. Now, I think this definition reveals so much, doesn't it, about Aristotle, who is the main man when it comes to virtue ethics. You know, we know a lot about Aristotle from the course so far. We know that he loves the use of reason, for example. You know, we know that he's obsessed with this idea of everything having a purpose, having a telos. And so this definition really draws together so much of what we already know about Aristotle. And I think we will finish today's revision session with a much deeper, richer understanding of who he was and how he thought human beings should not only live their lives, but also how they should live their lives as moral agents. And so lots to think about and lots to talk about today. Very excited. We are looking, as you can see here, at the 7th topic on the AQA Paper 1 spec. We are continuing our look at normative ethical theory. So this is our third and final theory that we need to study. We've looked at natural law, which also had Aristotelian influence. We've looked at situation ethics, and now we're looking at virtue ethics. Now, just a really quick note that you will need to be able to apply virtue ethics to issues of human life and death and issues of animal life and death as well. So our big emphasis when we are studying virtue ethics today is not only on that core AO1 and AO2 knowledge, but it is also going to be on our applications. Always be thinking, what would a virtue ethicist say about issues of human life and death, you know, embryo experimentation, for example, or cloning, and then issues of animal life and death, for example, the use of animals for experiments or for food. So always be thinking, how could I apply this? What examples could I give the examiner if I was asked to apply virtue ethics to issues of human or animal life and death? So in terms of the particular focus that AQA want us to have, we need to know about the background to Aristotle. So we need to know about his idea of telos, of eudaimonia, and the function argument that he presents. We need to know about his views on the nature of the soul and the virtues. We'll be looking at the doctrine of the mean, also known as the golden mean, so how you actually work out what a virtue is. We'll be talking about the importance of having proper intention. So what are the intentions you have behind your decisions and your actions? And we'll be looking at theoria, I hope I've pronounced that appropriately, which means contemplation, and the idea from Aristotle that this is the highest good for humans. You know, he loved this idea of people contemplating things, of using reason, of thinking, of reflecting and philosophizing. And we'll look at that as this idea of the highest good for humans, this ultimate form of eudaimonia, of complete flourishing and fulfilling your potential. We, of course, also need to know our AO2 for our 15 markers and, of course, for our 25 markers on the dialogue section of paper 2, where we need to be able to evaluate this theory. So, you know, I don't want you to just know what virtue ethics is. I want you to be able to give me strengths of this approach to moral decision making, weaknesses, criticisms, problems with this approach to moral decision making. And of course, as well, we've got to get our critical analysis in there. So we will be critically analysing this 2,000-year-old approach to ethics. Now, I've put here on the screen an important note for you that virtue ethics is fundamentally different from the two ethical theories we've already studied. So it really is, you know, so different, radically different from natural moral law and situation ethics. And the reason for this is very simple. Those two approaches ask the question, what should I do? They're very much about the morality of actions, whereas this approach is about the morality of the individual. Because whereas natural moral law and situation ethics are focused on asking, what should I do, and giving you guidance on what you should do, whether that's primary precepts or working principles, virtue ethics asks a very different question. Virtue ethics isn't really concerned with specific examples, which is why the applications to issues of human and animal life and death are very interesting. Virtue ethics is not interested with what I should do in particular circumstances. Virtue ethics is focused, as I said before, within you. It is focused on what kind of person should I be. And so whereas natural moral law and situation ethics are very much outward facing approaches to ethics, and they are concerned with those practical examples, virtue ethics is very inward facing, and it's about who you are as an individual, what kind of person you should be, and how you can cultivate virtue within you. It's about this development of character. And so whilst they're interested with practical examples, virtue ethics is all about practical wisdom. See what I did there? It's all about practical wisdom. It's about equipping you with the moral knowledge, if I can put it like that, to make the right decision. So virtue ethics is not about making the decision for you. It's about giving you the skill set to make the decision for yourself. And so already in terms of critiquing and critically analysing this approach, we could say it gives you much more autonomy, because it's not about telling you what to do, but it's giving you the skill set to make that decision for yourself. And so the two key points really that we'll be coming back to throughout today's video are this idea of virtue and this idea of practical wisdom, and this idea that you as an individual need to be using your reason and you need to be acting virtuously. And, you know, it's all about you making those decisions. You know, Barry Schwartz, for example, will say someone with practical wisdom knows when to follow the rules, but also when to break them, which is, I think, you know, very different, isn't it? To natural moral law, for example, which is about rigidly following those 5 primary precepts. So yes, a brilliant moral theory, because it is a very unique approach, and it really is one that stood the test of time. As I say, we're going to be going all the way back to ancient Greece. We'll be going back to the days of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, but then we'll also be looking at contemporary philosophers, Anscombe, for example, and Schwartz, who talk about the need for a revival in virtue ethics in the post-religious world that we live in, where people need to be empowered to think for themselves, to cultivate morality within themselves in order to make those moral decisions for themselves. So now that I've rambled on, let's keep going, shall we? Let's get on with it. And I wanted to just start by signalling to you the key scholars that we'll be meeting today. Remember, your A-level answers need to be grounded in scholars. Make sure, if you can, every paragraph refers to a scholar, you know, whether that's Aristotle, whether that's Anscombe, whether that's Aquinas or Schwartz. Make sure you are referencing your scholars, because they allow the examiner to give you the marks, you know. They need to be in there. So we are going to be covering thousands of years, quite literally, of human thinking in terms of how people should make ethical decisions and what kind of people we should try to be. So we will be starting with Plato and Aristotle. No, we won't. We'll actually be going further back. We'll be starting with Socrates. So we'll be looking at Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Aristotle being our main man, our ancient Greek philosophers, the founding fathers of philosophy, basically. And we'll be looking at how they developed virtue ethics in their ancient Greek context. We'll be looking at how Aquinas was inspired by Aristotle. You know, we have seen this time and again on paper 1, haven't we? Where, who am I trying to talk about now? Where Aquinas, there we go, where Aquinas has been inspired by Aristotle, whether that's in the development of his arguments for the existence of God, or whether that's been natural moral law. We're now going to see how Aquinas was inspired by Aristotle on the issue of virtue ethics. We'll also then be looking at Anscombe's 20th century revival of virtue ethics. She said that in this post-religious world, we need to bring back virtue ethics, because if people don't want to get their morals from God, they need to be given the skill set to make moral decisions for themselves. And then we'll be looking at Barry Schwartz, who gave a very famous TED talk very recently, in which he said that we need to be teaching morality in schools. We need to be giving students the moral skills to make moral decisions for themselves. You know, we need to get virtue back on the agenda in the 21st century. So yeah, you know, we're covering literally thousands of years worth of human thought here. And yeah, just a quick reminder, make sure every single answer is grounded in your scholars. Be referring to your scholars, be referring to their books, drop in a key quote if you can, and make sure the examiner can give you as many marks as they would like to. Let's aim for full marks. Let's go for an A star. So, talking of key scholars and key quotes, I wanted to start by giving you a couple of key quotes from Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, which is the key text we need to know for virtue ethics. And in this book, Aristotle writes, every art and every inquiry, and similarly every action as well as choice, is held to aim at some good. Now, all that he's saying there is that everything we do is aiming at some good. Everything we do is about working towards goodness and achieving goodness. He also, in this book, really emphasizes happiness. Aristotle believes that happiness is the ultimate purpose of life. We are here to be happy. In particular, we're here to achieve eudaimonia, which is this supreme state of human flourishing where we fulfill our potential. And he says that happiness then is found to be something perfect and self-sufficient. So you can find it from within yourself. You don't need to rely on anything else. You know, you don't need to buy the latest Louis Vuitton. You don't need to get noticed on Instagram by Kylie Jenner. Do you know what I mean? You know, it's something self-sufficient, being the end to which our actions are directed. So it is our ultimate aim to be happy. And he believed that that is achieved, as I say, by achieving eudaimonia, this state of flourishing where you fulfill your potential, you fulfill your function. And he also says, now you like this quote as well, for one swallow does not make a summer, nor does one day. And so too, one day or a short time does not make a man blessed and happy. And this really reflects the fact that virtue ethics is focused on your whole life rather than on the individual moral decisions that you make. So as I say, whereas other theories are very much focused on the specific moral decisions that you make, virtue ethics is about the idea you should become a virtuous person over your entire lifetime. And so virtue ethics very much takes this long view. It's not about the specific decisions you make. It's about stepping back and looking at your life as a whole, about your development as a virtuous individual, basically. And it's this idea that you develop that through experience, because through experience, you develop practical wisdom that helps you to make the right decisions, to do virtuous things in the future. So yes, that really reflects his view that ethics should take a long view, that we shouldn't focus on the specific moral decisions. It's about taking a step back and looking at your development as an individual over an entire lifetime. And again, that reflects the fact that this is a very inward-facing theory. It's about the development of character, the development of virtue within you, rather than on the specific moral decisions that you make. So, a very quick look at the key terms for you now, because some of the questions that you could be asked in the exam, for example, could refer to specific terms that are here, and you should be applying these terms and using these terms in order to achieve level 5. That top band, you know, those top A star answers will be using these terms. So arete is excellence or virtue, the fulfillment and realization of potential / function. Virtue itself, we've been through, is settled purposive disposition located in the mean, golden mean, and being determined by right reason. And we're going to look at how Aristotle categorizes virtues into intellectual and moral virtues, those concerned with the rational and the non-rational parts of your soul. And virtue is then habitually doing what is right. It's about that you then just do the right thing all the time because you have become a virtuous person. And so it's about associating the person with the act, not just seeing the act in isolation. It's about saying, well, good people do good things. And that's why you should focus on developing the person, so then they will always do good things rather than obsessing over the act itself. Vices then are the opposite of virtues, the deficiencies and excesses between which virtues lie, excuse me, I should have rehearsed that. So yeah, basically the golden mean is where the virtue is, in the middle between the deficiency and the excess. So we'll look at how you actually work out what a virtue is. Basically, a virtue lies in the golden mean, in the middle between a deficiency and an excess. Eudaimonia then, one of my favourite concepts of all time, is the state of supreme happiness and flourishing. For humans, this is achieved by using reason to fulfill your potential. The soul, for Aristotle, this is the form or the blueprint of the body, one of his 4 causes. Souls can be attributed to plants, animals, and humans, and we'll look at his hierarchy of souls. These form a hierarchy, oh yeah, as we will, the vegetative, the sensitive, and the rational, which is what the human being possesses, the ability to think rationally, to use reason, which is unique to humans. The golden mean, virtues lie between 2 extremes, as I've said, the excess and the deficiency. For example, courage lies in the golden mean between cowardice and recklessness. Dispositions then are character traits. Virtue is a disposition in relation to a mean. Phronesis then is wisdom/intelligence related to practical action. So we'll be looking at practical wisdom as something very important when it comes to virtue ethics, in particular with the modern developments from Barry Schwartz, and we'll talk about his TED Talk a little bit more. What's the next one? Forgotten how to pronounce this word. Phronimos. I'm going to say that's probably really, really wrong, but you know, hopefully you know the spelling. You don't need to tell the examiner, you need to write it. The man of practical wisdom, who is best qualified to define virtuous behavior in any situation. So yeah, Aristotle was very much about identifying experts who have developed practical wisdom, and someone with practical wisdom is best placed to define what virtuous behavior would actually be, because they've developed it. Important to note that someone with practical wisdom is made, not born. It's something you develop through experience. Hence that saying, the older, the wiser. Yeah, because of experience, you develop wisdom. Theoria then is the intellectual virtue of contemplation, which Aristotle says is the good life for human beings. He sees contemplation as the ultimate aim for human beings. It is the ultimate state of eudaimonia, that life of contemplation, of thinking, of using reason, of reflecting, of philosophizing. Hence the fact I became an RE teacher. Temperance then is the virtue of self-control, one of the cardinal virtues. Voluntary action is action brought about by the will, so it's related to free will there. And holistic, one of my favorite words of all time, is concerned with the whole. And remember, virtue ethics is a holistic theory. It's concerned with the whole person. It's not concerned with the individual things that you do. It's concerned with the development of you as a whole person over your whole lifetime. So it takes, as I said before, the long view. So another quote for you, love a good quote, from Aristotle. He says that moral virtue is a mean between 2 vices, one of excess and the other of defect or deficiency. It is such a mean because it aims at hitting the middle point in feelings and in actions. This is why it is a hard task to be good, for it is hard to find the middle point in anything. So basically, Aristotle 2,000 years ago was saying that we need balance. Everything in life is about balance. It's about avoiding extremes. In order to be happy, in order to be a good person, you need to live a life of balance. You need to hit that perfect midpoint. You need to achieve the mean. It's about a balancing act, of excesses and deficiencies. So this is reminding me of my GCSE maths days, to be honest, which is quite triggering. But, you know, in the context of morality, when we say the mean or the golden mean, what we mean is that virtues are determined. We can work out what a virtue is by finding the golden mean, the midpoint between the excess and the deficiency. And it's that idea of balance being good. Everything is about balance. You want balance, you want moderation. That is what goodness, what morality, what virtue is going to be all about. So our key thinker today, as I say, is Aristotle. So I wanted to just give you a little bit of information about him. So he was an ancient Greek philosopher. He was a student of Plato, and he was the founder of the Lyceum. And he was enormously influential on the development of Western philosophy. You know, whatever you're studying, other than, of course, A-level RE, you will find Aristotelian influence in there. Yeah, whether you're studying biology or, you know, you're studying psychology, you will find Aristotelian influence in there. So You know, this man is one of the most influential people in history. You know, so much of what we do for today and so much of what we take for granted today is traced all the way back to him. You know, so for example, he has made key contributions to physics, biology, zoology, metaphysics, logic, ethics, aesthetics, poetry, drama, music, rhetoric, psychology, linguistics, economics, politics, meteorology, geology, and politics. I need to lie down. But it's basically, you know, a brilliant illustration there of how influential he is. So yes, I'm so happy that we get so much chance to talk about Aristotle on this A level because he is so influential. And he was also pioneering in terms of finding out the Earth was sphere, not flat. Yeah, because based on his observation of an eclipse of the moon, he was able to demonstrate the Earth was sphere. So yes, well done, Aristotle, a pioneer that we are still talking about and we are all still influenced by today. And there he is in all his statue glory. He was really important to note an empiricist. So in contrast to his teacher Plato, who was a rationalist, so a great synoptic link there to when we talk about the soul, body and mind, Aristotle believed that knowledge is attained through observation and experience. Knowledge is ultimately based on sense experience. And that links in nicely, I think, with his idea of practical wisdom, doesn't it? That you develop knowledge of morality over your lifetime, that the older you become, the wiser you become. Another key idea of his, probably the central idea we need to know in terms of virtue ethics, is his idea of telos, that everything has a purpose to fulfill, everything has a function to fulfill. So Aristotle believed that everything has a purpose or a telos, which means end goal to fulfill. This is the final cause, one of his 4 causes. Now, he believed that for human beings, our telos is to achieve eudaimonia, this state of supreme happiness that is the result of fulfilling our potential and reaching our highest level of flourishing. Now, this really has made a resurgence recently in society. You know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, for example, a key 20th century theory of business motivation, is all focused on achieving self-actualization. He says we are all aiming for self-actualization to fulfill our potential, basically. And this was something Aristotle was talking about over 2,000 years ago. And eudaimonia is defined by Hutter and Waterman as the pursuit of virtue, excellence, and the best within us. And that's why eudaimonia is so relevant for virtue ethics, because we achieve our potential, or we fulfill our potential, by pursuing virtue, excellence, and the best within us. So becoming the best that we can be. Now, Aristotle very famously said that everything in existence has a cause. Not just one cause, though, 4 causes. He said everything has 4 causes. And so whether you're talking about post-it notes, a mug, a pen, a phone, you get what I'm saying? Everything has 4 causes. It has a material cause, which is what something is made of. So what is the phone actually made of? What materials is it made of? It has a formal cause. What shape does it have and what does it resemble? So, for example, a mobile phone. An efficient cause, the cause of it, what brought it into existence. So obviously a designer, and obviously in this case, a production line, I'm assuming, you know, lots of machines. I'm no iPhone manufacturer expert. And then the final cause, what purpose it has. What is the reason it exists? What is it here to fulfill or do? And of course, for modern iPhones, many functions. Yeah, so traditionally to make phone calls, but now for communication, for research, for sales. But yeah, the final cause is the telos, the purpose of something. But he believes everything has 4 causes. And he said very famously, we do not have knowledge of a thing until we have grasped its why. That is to say, its cause. So what is the reason everything exists? That is what he was interested in working out. And he believed we exist. Our final cause is eudaimonia. The purpose of human life is flourishing, it's self-actualization, being the best you can be. And of course, as Hutter and Waterman say, that is achieved by pursuing virtue, excellence, and the best within us, really emphasizing the importance of virtue. A couple of key quotes from Aristotle, which I particularly like, and you might, you know, like to put on a post-it note on your bedroom wall. Who knows? He said, we are what we repeatedly do. He said, excellence is not an act, but a habit. That is so important for understanding virtue ethics, guys. You know, remember, this whole theory is not about critiquing actions. It's not about saying what actions you should do, but it's about the habits you should be cultivating. This idea you should be becoming a virtuous person. And it's all about habits. You should be habitually virtuous. And that is the task of a lifetime, something that schools should develop and that you should continuously develop. He said happiness is the meaning and purpose of life, the whole aim of human existence. And remember, he believed happiness is achieved by fulfilling eudaimonia, the pursuit of virtue, excellence, and the best within us. And finally, really importantly, he said educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all. Really important because he distinguished between intellectual virtues and moral virtues. So we believe they are both as important as one another. You need intellectual virtues of the mind and then intellectual virtues, we could say, of the soul or the heart. So we believe they are both important. And then just another important point as well, his idea of the prime mover, which was a massive influence on Aquinas's view of the cosmological argument, I should say. Terrible grammar there. The prime mover is the final cause of the universe. So remember, he says everything has a final cause. Ours is eudaimonia. The universe is the prime mover. It is not the creator, but like a magnet, creates motion by drawing all things to it. The prime mover moves without being moved itself. So obviously, you know, you see a real similarity there, don't you, with his idea of the uncaused cause. Everything is moving towards it. The prime mover is the unmoved mover, serving as the final cause of the universe. So just another key part of his theory for you there, really, which is linked to the cosmological argument. And again, shows the influence he has had, for example, on Aquinas, who then completely influences Christian thinking today. In terms of our area of focus, then, we're going to focus on eudaimonia, which is Aristotle's belief that we want to achieve happiness, and the way that we achieve happiness is by pursuing virtue, excellence, and what is the best within us. Now, Aristotle's starting point when it comes to eudaimonia is the teleological claim, remember telos means purpose, that every action is aimed at attaining some good. So that's a great link to metaethics as well, the idea that everything we do is aimed at some good. And of course, when we talk about metaethics, we talk about what does the good mean? How do we determine what is good? The final and ultimate end to which human action should be geared is eudaimonia, which can be translated as flourishing or supreme happiness. As we've said, we believe this is achieved, according to his approach, through virtue, excellence, and the best within us. It is not attained, importantly, through pleasure or wealth. It is the result of fulfilling a greater purpose. And so Aristotle believes that our human ability to reason plays an important role in achieving eudaimonia. And this is very important because reason is at the central of virtue ethics. At the center even, we need to be using reason in order to work out what to do in different situations. Yeah, virtue ethics, remember, is about giving you the skills to decide rather than telling you what to do. And Aristotle writes in Nicomachean Ethics, the good life is not the kind in which we eat, reproduce, sense, move, remember, or imagine well, because even plants and animals can do that. But the good life for human beings is that in which we reason well. So remember, he believes theoria, contemplation, is the ultimate good life for humans. So a good life for people is a life in which we reason well. And so, as I've put here, Aristotle saw human beings as very unique in their possession of a rational soul, which he saw as the highest form. And we're going to look at the hierarchy of souls in just a moment. He believed the uniqueness of the human soul lies in its capacity for rational thought. Reasoning well is therefore how humans attain goodness and achieve eudaimonia. So you've got to think for yourself, very radical, isn't it, as an idea in the modern world. You've got to think for yourself, not just be told what to do, and not just be driven by external motivations and, you know, incentives you've been given or the threat of punishment you've been given. You've got to think for yourself. You've got to use practical wisdom. And that means you've got to decide, what is the purpose of my life? Why am I here? What should I do in this situation? So his emphasis is on you reasoning, on you thinking for yourself. And as I've put, this involves cultivating and exercising virtue for your entire life. Now, we're going to come back again and again to a concept called practical wisdom, which is basically the use of reason. So practical wisdom is this idea of using reason, and it's using reason to determine what to do in each situation. And as I put here, this is something we're going to associate with Barry Schwartz. We'll come back to him later. And basically, he says practical wisdom, based on what Aristotle has written, is displaying the right virtues at the right time and in the right way. And that involves you using your brain, doesn't it? You've got to think for yourself. Now, the key example that he gives is a hospital janitor, because they are given a job description, of course, but in that hospital setting, just following that job description, you know, of cleaning the wards and of moving the beds, for example, is not sufficient, is it? Because you are working with people who are in, you know, a very emotional state, and they could be in a very vulnerable place in their lives. And so Barry Schwartz uses the example of a hospital janitor to say that whenever you're working with other people, whenever you're interacting with other people, you can't just follow rigid job descriptions. You can't just follow the rules or the conventions or the customs. You've got to exercise practical wisdom as well. You've got to think for yourself. And this is something that will come with experience over time, doing a job, working with real people. But at the core of virtue ethics, as I say, is this belief. You can't just tell people, follow the rules. You can't just say, do this and you'll be fine. At the core of virtue ethics is reasoning well, is using practical wisdom to display the right virtues at the right time and in the right way. But we're going to pick up on this a bit later. For now, I want to emphasize then this idea of reasoning being really important, because Aristotle believes that the good life, that eudaimonia for human beings, is theoria, contemplation. So Aristotle believes that happiness is an activity which conforms to the highest virtue, which must be the best thing in us. And remember, he's all about being your best. The highest thing in us is reason, our intelligence, our intellect, which is unique to human beings. We use this to engage in science. And remember, he was such a pioneer of scientific theories and scientific methods. And he believed we need to use science to discover what the world is really like, to work out the four causes of everything. And he wanted us to be able to explain everything. And he said there can be no greater achievement of reason than this. Now, he said science and scientific discoveries are the highest objects of knowledge. And so contemplation of them gives us our greatest happiness, not least because we can contemplate whenever we like. We can all engage in thinking, reflecting, reasoning whenever and wherever. And so he said contemplation should be done for its own sake, not for the sake of anything else. So it shouldn't be a means to an end. It should be an end in itself. It has intrinsic value. It is beneficial for us to contemplate, to reflect, to think for ourselves. And so he even goes as far to say that contemplation means contemplation of the divine. So it's a way of thinking about God, thinking about him, and, you know, really going beyond what the body is capable of. You know, it means transcending your earthly existence. And so reasoning is the greatest thing we can do, because it takes us higher than our bodies are able to. And so intellectual contemplation, Aristotle believes, brings us more happiness than practical activity. And so the reason I'm sharing this with you is because Aristotle, again, I'm saying it again, emphasizes reason, the importance of you thinking for yourself. And so his entire virtue ethics approach is not about telling you, do this, follow this rule. It's about telling you, you need to think for yourself. You need to learn from experience. You need to see cultivating virtue and living a good life as the task of your lifetime. And so it's all about contemplation. So whereas other theories might involve telling you what to do, this theory is telling you to think for yourself and to develop the moral character and to, you know, cultivate the moral skills, shall we say, to actually then live the good life. So yes, the emphasis of this moral theory, as I feel I've said about 1,000 times now, I do apologise for being a stuck record, is all about looking inwards and developing your use of your reason and challenging you to think for yourself, rather than just telling you what rules to follow. You know, if we just follow the rules, we actually lose our ability to think for ourselves. We become robots, don't we? So Aristotle created this hierarchy of souls. He believed there were 3 different souls. He believed that there was the vegetative soul that plants had and they can't think for themselves. He believed that there was a sensitive soul, which animals have because they do have senses, they do feel things, but they don't think for themselves. And that is exactly what humans do. hence the fact that contemplation is the highest good in our lives. We then have at the highest level the human soul, the rational soul, which is capable of thought and reflection. So, as I say, he has this hierarchy of souls, and this is very relevant, I think, for when you're applying virtue ethics to issues of non-human life and death, because you are saying that humans are the highest form of life, basically, aren't you? And this is very anthropomorphic, and it very much exalts the human being, because it's saying, Aristotle is saying, that the soul is not, as it was in some of Plato's writings, a completely separate substance from the body. Aristotle is not a dualist like Plato, as you'll know from your soul revision. Instead, he believed the soul's very essence is defined by its relationship to an organic structure. So basically, you cannot separate the soul from the body. So he's a materialist in that sense. And so he said not only humans, but animals and plants too have a soul. There is a hierarchy of souls. So remember, he is not a dualist. He believes that the body and soul are connected. They're dependent on each other. And remember, he made the big distinction as well between humans and then animals and plants. He said the good life is not the kind in which we eat, reproduce, sense, move, remember, or imagine well, because plants and animals can do that, but in which we reason well. So remember, it is this ability to reason, hence the fact I've put it in yellow there, that makes humans unique. And so they are at the top of the hierarchy of souls. So this brings us to the function argument, because function depends on nature of the soul. And plants, animals, and humans have different souls, so they have different functions in this world. For human beings, it is the exercise of reason, the rational part of the soul, which is unique to them. And so remember, the good life is that in which we reason well, because as you can see, for plants, they have a vegetative soul, so their key features are nutrition and growth, so they just get on with doing that without thinking about it. They don't think, oh, should I take some water from the soil today? Oh, should I grow in the direction of the sun today? They just do it, don't they? In the same way, animals, they have a sensitive soul because they do have sensory function, but they only have low-level thought. So they have nutrition and growth, they have movement, they move, obviously, they have sense perception, so they might feel fear, and they also have low-level thought, you know, about where to get the food from or which predators to avoid. But it is then human beings with their rational soul who have all of these things plus reason. And that is what makes human beings unique. That is what Aristotle believed makes them the best part of the world, because they are the ones that can reason. And so a great link, as I say, is to issues of non-human life and death. Basically, you know, Aristotle is thinking, well, yeah, do what you want with the lesser souls, because we're the only ones that can reason. And that's what makes us unique. And that's what makes us worthy of being at the top of the hierarchy. An interesting link to 19th century thinking, J.S. Mill, John Stuart Mill, really did build on what Aristotle was saying. He said it is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. So basically, it's better to be a human being with your ability to reason and think, who is then unhappy, rather than just to be happy with the life of a pig, which is only concerned with sense perception, movement, nutrition and growth, and very low level thought. Although I do actually believe pigs are very intelligent, but we're not doing zoology today. But the argument is that humans are at the top of this hierarchy of souls, and they have this very unique function in that they can reason. And remember, that function is the purpose of their life. Theoria, contemplation for Aristotle, is the purpose, the ultimate source of eudaimonia for human beings. It is our most important task to think for ourselves. And so virtue ethics is all about thinking for yourself. And so here's a really important thing that I want you to write down somewhere, get a post-it note, get your highlighters, get it stuck down somewhere, because Aristotle believes that reasoning well, remember, reason is that thing that is so unique to us and it is so important for us. Reasoning well means exercising virtue. And so this is where virtue ethics now really kicks in for us, because I've spoken so much, haven't I, about this idea of us contemplating and reasoning. And you might have been thinking, well, why is that relevant when we're talking about virtue ethics? This is why, because to reason well, to think well, to contemplate well means to exercise virtue, okay? So this is where it's all going to start making sense, I hope. So reasoning well means exercising virtue. It means exercising moral excellence. Now, moral excellence, I love that phrase. It's something that you have a responsibility to do, according to Aristotle. He's not going to tell you how to do that. He's going to help you to cultivate, good character so that you can then exercise it. But he's not going to tell you these are the rules to follow in order to exercise moral excellence. He does believe, however, that this soul, and remember, he believes we are at the top of the hierarchy of souls, this amazing human soul that we have is split into two areas. It is a rational soul, but it is also a non-rational soul. So we have the rational component and the non-rational component. In the same way that with GCSE maths, you have a calculator component and a non-calculator component. Really random example, but it helps me remember. So there you go. You have got within the rational soul what he calls intellectual virtues. And then within the non-rational soul, you have moral virtues. Now, there are links and crossovers between them that we're going to look at. But I want to remind you before we unpack them that for Aristotle, becoming a virtuous person is the task of a lifetime. So remember, this whole theory is not about saying, do this action, do this action. It's about taking a step back and looking at virtue as the task of a lifetime. And remember, phronesis increases as we go through life. Our experiences teach us and help us to develop practical wisdom. So just remember that. As I say, there are two parts to the human soul, the rational and the non-rational. So on the one hand, we have the intellectual virtues, which are associated with the rational part of the soul. And these are controlled by reason, which, as we know, is so important for Aristotle in order to contribute to the most virtuous life. And remember, that is what life is all about. That is eudaimonia for Aristotle. We have the 5 primary intellectual virtues: technical skills, scientific knowledge, practical wisdom, which is our key focus, intelligence then, and theoretical wisdom or philosophical wisdom. And then we also have secondary intellectual virtues: resourcefulness, understanding, judgment, and cleverness. We then also have, of course, the non-rational part of the soul, and that is associated with the 12 moral virtues. They refer to emotions and appetites and are formed by repetition, practice, and imitation. So this reflects the fact that virtues are formed habitually. So we want to be in a place where it's just a habit to be virtuous. We don't need to be threatened with punishment in order to be virtuous. We just want it to be a habit. But also imitation. This is really important. It's the idea that you need moral exemplars, people who have developed practical wisdom, who are, as I say, moral exemplars, so we can imitate them. And so you could say in the 21st century, virtue ethics doesn't work because we're lacking desperately these moral exemplars, So a big part of virtue ethics is being able to imitate moral exemplars, imitating people. So it's not about following rules, it's about imitating people. Again, reflecting the fact it's about virtue ethics being the task of a lifetime, concerned holistically with the whole person. So you imitate a whole person rather than just following specific rules. And the 4 primary moral virtues, which are really important to know because they become the cardinal virtues in Christianity, because Aquinas loves them so much that he takes them from Aristotle and he basically amalgamates them. Is that the word? He basically gets them and he puts them into Christianity. That's what I meant to say. The 4 primary moral virtues, which are prudence, cautiousness, justice, fairness, temperance, which means self-restraint, self-control, and fortitude, which means courage. Okay. And just as a little exam technique reference for you, I want you to start planning how would you apply the exercising of these virtues to specific examples, such as issues of human and non-human life and death. So, for example, think about the issue of cloning or think about the use of animals as food. Do they show prudence, justice, temperance, or fortitude? Does cloning or, do animal experiments, do they show courage because you are daring to, move forwards with science? I don't know, but that's what I want you to start thinking about in terms of not just what these intellectual and moral virtues are, but how would they be applied? How would they influence someone in making moral decisions? So yes, just to consolidate that for you, he splits the soul into a rational and a non-rational part, into the intellectual virtues and then the moral virtues. Now, the fact that he is so concerned with developing the whole person through considering the intellectual and moral is something that Marceau Nussbaum really, really loves. And she really does love to bring to light the fact that Aristotle takes a holistic, person-centered approach to ethics. So She says that Aristotle's norm of a reasonable person, and remember, he's all about reason, so his norm of a reasonable person is one whose character is infused completely by the correct reason for action, which have shaped all their motives and attitudes. Because he aims to describe the cultivation of a whole person and a way of life, rather than simply to prescribe a list of duties, he has ample scope for discussing emotional self-shaping. So, there's a big trend at the moment, for example, for emotional intelligence, isn't there? And so you could say that what Aristotle's doing is very linked to that. It's about developing the person and their emotional, moral, intellectual skills. And what I love about this quote, and what I really want you to write down, if I had a little on-screen highlighter, I'd use it. Where is it? Oh, here it is. This could all go wrong, guys. Do brace yourselves. I've never done this on a YouTube video before. Because he aims to describe the cultivation of the whole person. Oh my gosh, that's awful. And a way of life. Oh dear, it looks awful. Rather than simply to prescribe a list of duties. Guys, if you do buy the PowerPoint, don't worry, it will not have this awful annotation on it because I'm sorry, that's disastrous. Anyway, basically, I want you to know that it's about, that looks horrific, the cultivation of the whole person and a way of life. As I've said, it's the task of a lifetime, rather than simply prescribing a list of specific duties. He is not giving you precepts. He's not giving you rules. He's not giving you, 600 things you need to do. He is simply saying to you, let's develop you as a person. Let's cultivate reason. Let's develop virtue. Let's get into the habit of virtue. So I don't have to tell you what you exactly need to do in every situation, but you have the ability to work that out for yourself using practical wisdom, and just because you are now a virtuous person. So yeah, just a quick note that it is all about, how do I get off the highlighter now? Oh no. You see, this is where it all goes wrong. It's all going to fall apart. It's all about, oh no, the development of the whole person, reflecting the unique fact that this approach to ethics is very much about a holistic perspective. It's about developing the whole person. Okay, so let's talk about the 5 primary intellectual virtues. They are techne, if I can say it like that, phronesis, nous, episteme, and sophia. So we've got artistry or craftsmanship, practical wisdom, intuition or understanding, scientific knowledge, which of course is a big deal in the modern world, isn't it? We're all about epistemic imperialism in the modern age. We all love our scientific evidence for everything, and philosophical wisdom. Our focus, really, the one that I can see you mentioning in the exam, shall I put it like that, is of course phronesis, practical wisdom, and we're going to come back to that again and again throughout the video. And so that is probably the one of the intellectual virtues that I would be mentioning in the exam, the fact that you need practical wisdom to work out when to use the right reason in the right context in the right way. I just have a couple of questions for you, though, you might want to think about today using your reason. It's the highest aim of human life. Get that theory going. Which is the most important for a human to have, do you think? Which is the most highly valued in the world today? And do you think that these are developed by the school system today? We know Aristotle started his school, the Lyceum. Do you think schools today develop all of these things, or do they value some over others? The other thing I need you to know is the 4, what we would call cardinal or primary moral virtues. Really important to know. And we're going to look at how you work out a virtue in a minute, by the way. But the 4 cardinal moral virtues, oh, it's going dark, isn't it? I've only just noticed that. Oh dear. Anyway, we must proceed quickly. We've not even got onto the AO2 yet. The 4 cardinal moral virtues are prudence, cautiousness, justice, fairness, temperance, self-restraint, and fortitude, which means courage or bravery. Do make sure you refer to them in the exam. I think if you want to include examples of moral virtues, they're the ones that I would use. So Aristotle believed that developing, possessing, and exercising these makes a person good and leads to a life of human flourishing. Now, remember, just saying prudence, justice, temperance, fortitude, that doesn't give me a concrete application to moral decision-making, does it? So you could say that's a weakness of his approach, because he doesn't give me clear guidelines. He just gives me virtues. And so what your job is then as the, the individual using their reason is to work out what would be the most just thing to do. Yeah. What would be the most courageous thing to do, for example? How am I showing self-restraint? So these virtues are not like the primary precepts of natural moral law, where they give you, much more concrete, clear instruction. But what they do achieve, what they do is they, tell you what virtues you should be exercising. And so, developing these, possessing these, and then exercising them using practical wisdom is the most important thing, according to Aristotle. In terms of their value, as I say, St. Thomas Aquinas is massively influenced, hugely inspired by Aristotle on a range of issues. And this is one of them. These virtues influenced him. He incorporated them into Christian moral thinking. And today they are taught alongside the three, what we call theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity. So they remain very relevant in the world today. So again, in terms of your AO2, these virtues do remain relevant because they remain key cardinal virtues, the four cardinal virtues in Christianity. And again, you might want to consider which is the most important for us to have, which is most highly valued today. So is virtue ethics still compatible with modern society? And do you think they are developed by the school system today? Okay, so how are they worked out now? I want to actually take a step back and say, how did he come up with these? How does Aristotle believe that you work out a virtue? And he presents for us the golden mean. This is his formula. This is his calculator, if you like, for working out a virtue. This is how you discover a virtue. So in the same way in your maths exam, you work out the mean by adding all the numbers together and then dividing by how many there are. I hope my maths teacher will hopefully be happy with that answer. He gives us this formula for working out the golden mean. And the golden mean helps people to act virtuously because practical wisdom, Phronesis, steers people to the perfect midpoint between excess and deficiency. So I'll say it again, this whole theory is about the idea that the right thing to do is always the balanced thing to do. It's about the midpoint. It's about moderation. It's about getting that midpoint and going in the middle. Now, as you can see from my little visual here, a moral virtue is the mean, the midpoint between two vices. One of deficiency, which means too little. If you're deficient in something, you don't have enough of it. And excess, which is having too much of something. To have an excess of something means to have overly enough. That doesn't really make sense, does it? It means having too much of it. Interestingly, I thought you might like to know, in terms of the universal application of virtue ethics, this is something that's also found in Eastern moral thinking. It's found in Buddhism because the Buddha taught his followers the importance of following the middle way. He left his life of indulgence in the royal palace to then become he practiced asceticism. I forgot what he did there. He went to live with the monks who were all about self-denial, the religious men who restricted themselves. And he said that actually the important path to take is the middle way, the balance between excess and deficiency. So, you could say that this is something that has universal application. One of our AO2 points, for example, will be that this approach, virtue ethics, lacks cultural relativism because it assumes every culture values the same virtues. But actually a counter argument to that could be that every culture values moderation. Every culture values a midpoint, a golden mean, for example, the middle way in Buddhism. So yeah, just a quick link there between Gautama Siddhartha and Aristotle, as you do. And so Aristotle said, all these constitute the middle, as well as what is best, which is in fact what belongs to virtue. So that is what he said about the midpoint, that a virtue constitutes the middle. It's all about balance. It's all about the midpoint, that balance between deficiency and excess. And he said, virtue, therefore, is a characteristic marked by choice, residing in the mean relative to us. Now, relative to us is important because he's saying that what is virtuous depends on the situation. And so you cannot just give rules to follow. You have to give people the tools to decide for themselves because they will have to decide in different situations what to do, because the mean is always relative to us. You know, finding out that midpoint, working out that point of balance is always going to be subjective to the situation. A characteristic defined by reason and as the prudent person would define it. And of course, that is one of our key virtues. Virtue is also a mean with respect to two vices. Remember, virtues and vices, one vice related to excess, the other to deficiency. So that is your textual grounding for this idea of the golden mean that is rooted in Aristotle's writing, this idea that a virtue is found between the excess and the deficiency, and that golden mean is always relative. And so you can't just say, this is always the right thing to do in this situation, because it's going to be relative. And so you need to be ready to work out the midpoint for yourself, to use reason. And of course, for the prudent person, that is going to be very straightforward to do, because they have cultivated those virtues, so they'll be able to work out the golden mean in each situation. And so in terms of just having a go at working out some golden means, I've got a list here of some of Aristotle's moral virtues. And of course, a virtue lies in the midpoint between deficiency and excess. And you might like to pause the video and just have a think about what the deficiency and excess is, or what they are, I think is the proper English, for each of the moral virtues on the screen. So just have a look at those moral virtues that I've put down there and just think, what is the deficiency and the excess that they lie between? And once you've paused and done that, or if you can't be bothered, fair enough, don't blame you. Here are some of the answers, the examples for you. So for example, fortitude, courage, lies between cowardice and rashness, whereas temperance lies between lies between a complete lack of concern and a complete lack of restraint. So, you know, it's all about this midpoint, this golden mean, excuse me, whereas stinginess and wastefulness are the deficiency and the excess that are the outliers of generosity, which is the golden virtue, the moral virtue, the golden mean. I'm now just making words up. This is how long I've been speaking. Do you know what that tells me, guys? That we need to take a break. So I want you to take a break. I want you to have a snack. I want you to have a drink. Pause the video, take a break, and we will come back to finish very quickly the last slide of AO1, and then we'll talk about the AO2 before it goes pitch black and you can't even see me. Take a break quickly, guys. I'm going to, and we shall reconvene. Right, I'm back. It's going very dark, but I've got a refill. So come on, guys, let's do this. So yes, we've talked about how you actually calculate a moral virtue, have we not? We've looked at how it lies in that midpoint, that golden mean between deficiency and excess. And so the individual using their reason, remember, it is so important you're using your reason, theoria, contemplation as this highest ultimate aim in life. You use that to work out what the moral virtue is. So you're not just being told what it is, you can work it out for yourself. And so how do we actually perform the virtues well? Well, it's all about choice. It's all about the freedom of your will, and it's all about your ability to think for yourself. So choice means rational deliberation, linked back to reason, of course, about what we do. Choice is rational. We choose for specific reasons. Only voluntary actions can be virtuous. That is so important to know, guys. You do not perform virtue by following rules. You have got to use reason. You've got to determine it for yourself. You've got to decide it for yourself. You cannot just follow rules and say, yeah, I'm a virtuous person. That is not what virtue is all about. That is why practical wisdom is so important. You cannot also, really importantly, be virtuous by accident. Yeah, you can't accidentally be virtuous because you ended up doing the right thing just by chance. We can only be praised and we can only be blamed for our choices. So, you know, think about the implications of that for the legal system, for example. You know, if someone hasn't intended to cause harm, and this is that idea of proper intention, can they actually be punished for what they've done? So we can only be praised or blamed for our choices, but very interestingly and importantly, our choices reveal our character. Now, remember, the mean is the median. This is relative to each person. However, it is best defined by the person whose name I can't pronounce, which is a Pronymos. No, I've got that completely wrong. Pheronymos. Anyway, you only need to spell it. Don't worry about the pronunciation. A man of practical wisdom. So a Pheronymos is a good judge of ethical matters because they are someone who's developed the experience. The mean will be rationally designed by the Pheronymos for each individual and not simply laid down as a universal prescription or rule. So again, remember, You are not, with this approach to ethics, being told, do this in this situation, do this in this situation. It is not legalistic in the slightest. It is all about you working it out for yourself, or, you know, for the Hieronymus telling you as a unique individual what to do. So just think, is virtue ethics helpful? It's certainly flexible, but is it practical? Do humans not need rules? And that is one key criticism we'll look at. So in terms of the in terms of the text that underpins this, we have to, of course, return to the Nicomachean Ethics. And Aristotle writes that moral virtue is concerned with passions and actions, and it is in these that excess, deficiency, and the middle term, the mean, reside. For example, it is possible to be afraid, to be confident, to desire, to be angry, to feel pity, and in general to feel pleasure and pain to a greater or lesser degree than one ought. And in both cases, this is not good. But, just having a drink for dramatic effect there, to feel them when one ought, and at the things one ought, in relation to those people whom one ought, for the sake of what and as one ought, all these constitute the middle as well as what is best, which is in fact what belongs to virtue. Now that encapsulates practical wisdom. Do you remember that quote I started with from Barry Schwartz about 10 hours ago, when he said that it's all about using the right virtue in the right context at the right time in the right way? That is what it's all about. It's not about following the rules. It's about reading the room, thinking about your individual unique situation, and doing the right thing in that moment in the right way at the right time. That is what virtue is all about. It's using practical wisdom to exercise virtue, using reason for that particular situation. And so just another point for you before we talk more about practical wisdom. Some virtues benefit the self, and some can benefit the self and others. For example, a courageous soldier who dies in battle will therefore benefit those who survive it, won't they? They've sacrificed their life. Justice considers the good of others as an end in itself, meaning that it is an altruistic virtue. And so justice, and remember we said that is one of our 4 cardinal virtues, has no mean. It is a simple extreme. It unites all the other virtues because it requires people to be brave, temperate, courageous, etc. And they are the other key, of course, cardinal virtues. Fortitude meaning brave, both for themselves and for the good of the community. And so Aristotle believes that in justice, every virtue is summed up. So, and this is really important, if you're talking about capital punishment, if you're applying virtue ethics to capital punishment, you've got to think, is capital punishment fully serving justice? Because if executing that person would fulfill justice, then you could say virtue ethics would allow it, because justice is every virtue summed up. So you've got to think this is a great opportunity to illustrate some applications by saying that justice is every virtue summed up. Now, I want to talk more about practical wisdom that we've just spoken about then, because Barry Schwartz, and I started with him a little bit earlier, and his example of the hospital janitor show that we can't just follow rules. We can't just follow regulations. We need to be exercising practical wisdom. And so he gave a TED talk, which really illustrates the contemporary nature of virtue ethics and how he's brought it to a modern audience, in which he said that moral skill is chipped away by an over-reliance on rules. Now, that is a quote I would love to see in your essay, that Barry Schwartz said moral skill is chipped away by an over-reliance on rules. And this shows why virtue ethics doesn't focus on giving people rules, but it focuses instead on developing moral skill. It's all about cultivating character, giving you the ability to reason, think, and decide for yourself, because you will lose moral skill if you are over-dependent or over-reliant, as he says, on the rules. He also says that people are not born wise. They become wise through experience, and that's the idea of practical wisdom. And as you get older and you grow and you learn from your mistakes, you become wiser. And this is something that takes time. Hence the fact that virtue ethics is the task of a lifetime, rather than being overly focused on the rules that you need to follow in that moment. We cannot just rely, he says, on following rules and procedures. There needs to be there needs to be some practical wisdom involved as well. He says that rules and procedures spare us from thinking, and so an over-reliance on them conditions us, and that is a war on wisdom. So we lose wisdom, we just get obedience, we just get compliance, and we just get conformity. And that means we don't think for ourselves, we're just slaves to a system, we're just robots to the rules. And he says that's a problem, that's a really bad thing. And he traces this back to education. He says our current education system doesn't give people skills. It follows scripts instead, yeah? It gets them to memorize facts for exams, and it gets them to memorize rules for life. It doesn't encourage them to think for themselves. And that is why on our exam, AQA credit us for critical analysis. It is critical analysis where I'm saying, this argument is flawed, this argument succeeds. It's when they see critical analysis that they give us extra marks in this exam, because critical analysis is your written evidence that you've thought critically for yourself. You've not just regurgitated a strength or weakness. You've not just regurgitated a fact or an example. You've actually critiqued the theory for yourself. And so that's why critical analysis is so important for this A-level, because we want you to think for yourself. We want you to develop wisdom and moral skill rather than just the ability to repeat and regurgitate, you know, quotes and facts and statistics. But that's his criticism of education. And he said, if we just get people to learn things in terms of memorizing them and following scripts, this leads to mediocrity. Therefore, whilst we do need rules, he says, absolutely, we need rules. We also need to realize that too many will prevent improvisation. And so that will lead to people losing their gifts. And he says people need principles, not just incentives, such as profit. You know, we need to have moral principles. We can't just be conditioned by carrots and sticks. We need to have real incentives. No, we don't need just incentives. Sorry, I've just reread that word. We need to have principles that, you know, are within us. Remember, this whole theory, as I keep saying, is about cultivating character rather than just following rules. Any work you do with people is moral work. That's his example with the janitor. They're not just there to clean, they're there to connect with people, to read the room, to do what's best for them. You know, they're not there to clean, they're there to show compassion as well. But that's not in the job description. They have to exercise practical wisdom, which they develop through doing the job. He says teachers need to be moral role models. Remember, Aristotle believes that we need to be imitating virtue, and teachers are the ones who mainly shape us, aren't they? And so they need to be moral role models, modeling at all times what it means to exercise practical wisdom. So students can imitate that, and then they can exercise it themselves. And there needs to be explicit teaching of virtues and, you know, teaching people how to develop their character, how to display, as we've said, the right virtues at the right time and in the right way. And, you know, if you ever need to define practical wisdom to someone, it is about displaying the right virtues at the right time and in the right way. And that is my, you know, that is my post-it note definition, as I'd call it. That is the definition I'd have on my post-it note on my wall. That practical wisdom is the ability to display the right virtues at the right time and in the right way. And of course, that only comes with experience, from learning from mistakes, learning from other people, from moral exemplars, and understanding how to actually do that. And so for Barry Schwartz, the person with practical wisdom, which is at the core of virtue ethics, knows when to follow and when to ignore a rule. They know how to improvise. They know how to use their skills in the pursuit of the right aim, and they know that wisdom depends on experience. A person with practical wisdom also knows that failure is okay because we learn from experience. They know that people need mentoring by wise people on how to care, that people do not need to be brilliant to be wise, but that without wisdom, brilliance can lead to trouble. So wisdom is so important, and that's something we develop through experience, through seeing moral exemplars, and from using reason. Again, linking back to the importance of reasoning, of thinking, of contemplating, of theoria as important. But again, I'll say it one final time. Well, actually, I can't make that promise. I'll say it one more time for now. When you're talking about virtue ethics, you have to emphasize that it's about cultivating autonomy within the individual. It's about giving them the skills rather than giving them the answers. That's what it's all about. And this is what practical wisdom is. It's a skill. It's about giving you moral skills rather than getting you to over-rely on the rules. Okay, so let's talk about your AO2, shall we? Let's get stuck into your AO2, which is so important when it comes, of course, to your 15 markers. So our first strength is from Anscombe, who revived basically the entire virtue ethics theory. They revived this theory, they brought it into the 20th century, and they put it back on the moral conversation agenda. So Anscombe says it is valuable in the modern world as it does not depend on belief in God. So Elizabeth Anscombe, or G.E.M. Anscombe, wrote in 1958 Modern Moral Philosophy, and this is the seminal text for this revival of virtue ethics. So you must mention this. If you've got an AO2 question on virtue ethics, make sure you mention this text, please, please, please. Because in it, she says that the only alternative to accepting God as the basis of morality is by developing a theory of human virtue. So basically, she's acknowledging the decline in religion, and she's saying if we're no longer going to turn to God and his commandments as our source of moral authority, we need to develop human virtue. If people aren't going to get their morals from God, then they need to get them from themselves. They need to develop virtue. And so she says in this post-religious world, we need to go all the way back to the pre-religious world. Yeah, we need to go back to before Christianity began. Let's go back to the ancient Greek times. Let's go back to Aristotle, and let's revive his theory of virtue ethics, which of course predates Christianity. And so you're kind of leapfrogging over the entire Christian era of the past 2000 years. This requires psychological and philosophical investigation into what a good life consists of, which of course Aristotle was all about. She believes that engaging in this will lead us to concrete answers. Now, the great thing is that everybody is interested in psychology today, and everybody is interested in philosophy today, whether that's existentialism, for example, you know, or whether it's issues of animal rights. Everybody is thinking about these things. So yes, this is very much back on the agenda. And this is in contrast to the consequentialist theories, which cannot give us any concrete answer. You know, so with utilitarianism, for example, everything is based on the outcomes, isn't it? It's all about, well, you know, what will the consequence of that be? With virtue ethics, it's about contemplation for its own good. It's not about, well, what the outcome of that will be. It's said to have intrinsic value, and she says that is important. Anscombe's paper is considered a seminal text in the revival of virtue ethics, and it has led to renewed interest in the 2000 years old approach. So your key takeaway here is that virtue ethics is relevant and it's important in a post-religious society because it takes us back to an ethical approach, if you like, that came into existence before religion. And so you can say if you're going to have a decline in religion and religion no longer influences us in terms of our morals, we need to reboot, if you like, virtue ethics, because it can give us moral guidance and help without dependence on belief in God. Another strength is that it's holistic and it's human-centered. It considers the whole person and it considers their whole lifetime, as we've said. So it takes into account the whole human person. It considers the development of their reasoning, their judgment, the practical wisdom and deliberation. So it empowers them to think for themselves, to decide for themselves. It values the strength of moral character above following rules, regardless of whether the rules are good, bad, or indifferent. So as I say, it's not expecting you to be a moral robot. It's considering you as a whole person. And of course, it originates in Aristotle's thinking about eudaimonia and human flourishing. So it clearly takes human beings and their happiness seriously. And this is a great thing because in the modern world, we do take happiness seriously, don't we? This is a big focus in social thinking today. People do want us to prioritize happiness. And you can say, well, virtue ethics absolutely does, because it's all about eudaimonia, which is Aristotle's theory that the purpose of life, the final cause of human life, remember one of his 4 causes, is to focus on flourishing, on fulfilling your purpose, which is achieved through contemplation, through exercising virtue, cultivating moral excellence. And so it considers the whole person. It doesn't expect people to become rule-abiding robots. You know, for example, Kant's ethical theory, we could say, expects you to be a robot. It expects you to just separate emotion from morals, and you should just do your duty. And it's very rigid, emotionless. This is not the case with virtue ethics. It considers the whole person. It takes a holistic approach, and it's all about emphasizing the importance of you as a person and considering you over the course of your lifetime rather than focusing on the individual actions, the individual moral decisions. So yeah, it's holistic and human-centered, and it emphasizes human happiness, which I think makes it very appealing for the modern audience. Another strength is that it helps people make moral decisions for themselves rather than telling them what to do. It gives greater autonomy and flexibility. And of course, again, in the modern market, this really resonates with the values of the 21st century. People in the modern world want autonomy. We live in an age of individualism, don't we? It's all about the individual. It's all about the self. We're all here taking our selfies. And so rather than telling people what to do, it empowers people to think for themselves, which I think really resonates with the modern way of thinking. And so virtue ethics does now remain relevant, or it has really, found a resurgence that has become relevant once again, because it focuses on giving people the ability to make moral decisions rather than telling them what rules to follow. This means it has much greater flexibility, and also it has much greater appeal. It gives the individual autonomy rather than telling them what to do. So it gives them the skills rather than instructions, which people value, because as I say, we're living in this cultish age, you could say, of the individual. It's about individual rights, individual freedoms, individual identity. And so it doesn't try to guess the future, but gives people the skills for their futures. I'm very proud of that line, if I may say so. It's about giving you skills for the future. And this is why you can say virtue ethics is a really good way of working out issues of human and non-human life and death, because although natural moral law, for example, can't be directly applied to things like cloning because it was created thousands of years ago, you can say that virtue ethics is much more helpful because it doesn't try to give you the answers, it tries to give you the ability to work out the answers. So you can say virtue ethics is much more helpful because it gives you the skills to do the right thing so that you're doing the right thing habitually, so it does always remain relevant no matter what the next moral issue will be, based on what the next scientific and human developments will be. And so virtue ethics does remain relevant because it gives you the skills for the future rather than trying to guess the future. Yeah. So that makes it very relevant and very applicable across all moral issues in all future moral scenarios. And another strength is that it doesn't demand perfection. So we can say it takes human nature seriously. It, has an accurate reflection of what human beings are like. It just wants simply to see you have ongoing development over the course of your life. So the theory is all about following the examples set by virtuous people. And the great thing about that is that they are also human beings who also made mistakes. And so this is arguably more realistic than other moral theories, which expect perfection. They expect you to follow the rules, to get it right, to do the right thing every single time. This theory is all about becoming a good person over the course of your lifetime. And actually, making mistakes is seen as a good thing because you can learn from them. And so virtue ethics, as I say, is based on the idea that virtue develops over a complete lifetime. So there is room for development and improvement, something that can be seen as more realistic and reasonable. However, and remember, there is always a however in your 15 markers, is there not? We're giving both sides of the argument. There are weaknesses, there are problems, there are criticisms. And the first one is that the theory lacks cultural relativism because it assumes that the same virtues are valued in every society. So Aristotle presents his 4 primary moral virtues, for example, and he assumes, or we assume, that they will be the same in every society. And this is a key criticism because it's saying it lacks cultural relativism. If it lacks cultural relativism, it won't be relevant around the world. And so it's not a successful moral theory. So different societies have different virtues. Different centuries have also had different virtues. If you think this theory was created in Aristotle's Athens, is it still relevant in Ben Wardle's 21st century? Do you know what I mean? So think about it. Consider the different values and ideas of morality in Athens, in Aristotle's time, in Victorian England, in secular Europe, and in modern China. So, historically and geographically, it doesn't actually remain relevant because different societies have different sets of virtues. And so we have to ask, whose virtues should be the role model? How do we decide which set of virtues is actually right? Now, you could say that the theory is the blueprint for each society. You know, each society could create their own version of virtue ethics, couldn't they? But the criticism that we could make is that it is lacking cultural relativism. It's not appreciating that different societies have different values. And so it is trying to impose certain virtues on everybody, which could be seen as wrong to do. A key link, of course, would be to meta-ethics, this question of how do we decide what the good is? Does the good objectively exist, or is it just a subjective matter of opinion? You know, is it an expression of a emotional reaction to something, as the motivist would say? And then, of course, to international laws. You know, if you think you've got the UN, for example, who try to create these international laws, and of course, the idea behind that is that everybody does have shared values and does have shared moral principles. But, you know, we've got to ask, does everybody in society share the same virtues? And so if they don't, is this theory actually going to work? Our next weakness then is that society does need rules and laws, not just virtues. So, of course, virtue ethics, as I've said 10,000 times, is all about the idea that we should focus on virtues, we should look inwards rather than looking outwards. But we could actually argue that in a world of 8 billion people, we actually do need rules and laws. I can't just stand there and go, just be virtuous, think for yourselves. We need rules and laws for society to function. Now, of course, Schwartz says that they make us lose our moral skills and they lead to us lacking in improvisation, but actually they are clearly important. We do need rules so that society can function. So I've put here, virtue ethics may inspire the individual, but it is not necessarily helpful in national and international politics, because democratic governments cannot make decisions based on individual character. They have to create laws, don't they? So political morality in the UK tends to run on consequentialist and utilitarian principles developed by Bentham and Mill, whereby politicians seek to maximise the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Virtue ethics cannot provide the clear, concrete rules or laws that a society needs. It takes place over a complete lifetime, which we've said is great, but also we can see it as a weakness because it means it's too broad, yeah? So you could say it sounds great for the individual to use virtue ethics, but if you're trying to devise an ethical system that works for a whole society, it just isn't sufficient. It's just not going to be successful because you cannot run a country by saying, do the most virtuous thing. You could certainly say that it gives insight and food for thought for educators. You know, it could help countries to develop their education systems, but on the whole, you could say this isn't enough on its own. Virtue ethics could play an important role in influencing politicians in how they vote, or, you know, as I say, influencing them in how they shape the school system. But on the other hand, you can say it's still not enough. You still need rules and laws. You cannot completely abandon them, which you could say virtue ethics is suggesting we do. And a key link, of course, is the application of virtue ethics to, you know, moral issues of human life and death and non-human life and death. You know, when there are no rules, when it comes to virtue ethics, it is very much on this case-by-case basis, isn't it? So is virtue ethics going to give a more flexible approach to embryo research and cloning based on, you know, the certain situation and on how well it fulfills certain virtues? So yeah, really interesting to think. Obviously, practical wisdom is important. We don't all want to be robots who are just blindly following the rules, but at the same time, surely you do need rules. And so we'll move on to our next weakness, which is that the theory is too anthropocentric. And so this is really important when it comes to the example of matters of non-human life and death, because we could say that this approach to ethics may have negative consequences for the environment and for animals, because the system is focused on human good and human flourishing. It's focused on eudaimonia, and it's focused, of course, on that hierarchy of souls. It is based on the idea that humans have a unique ability to think rationally, whereas the animal soul is restricted to that basic knowledge and sense perception. So by default, we could say they're seen as less valuable. And indeed, that's what Aristotle does believe. This suggests that human beings and human life is more important than any other species. So we'd call that speciesism. And this has contributed to over 2,000 years of undervaluing animals. You know, Aristotle influenced Aquinas on this one again. And he said, you know, that their life and death is subject to our use. The Catechism of the Catholic Church says that God created everything for man. And so we're in a position here where, because humans have this highest form of the soul, they are seen as more important. And so could that justify doing anything to animals? Because it's all about human flourishing and human success, because you've got the rational soul, whereas the plants have only got a vegetative soul and the animals have only got a sensitive soul. So we could argue the theory is too anthropocentric. And so if you are applying this to matters of non-human life and death, which you must do, guys, you know, you can really criticize virtue ethics here, because it's only interested in humans. It really exalts humans because of their ability to reason, which of course Aristotle thinks is the best thing since sliced bread, although of course they didn't have sliced bread back in ancient Greece, but you get what I'm saying. You know what I mean? Like, his whole argument is that reasoning is the most amazing thing. So he could not care less about the animals and plants that can't reason. And so that would justify doing anything to them for the sake of human flourishing. And so that is a nice link to the final slide, you'll be very pleased to know, which is where I want to encourage you to apply virtue ethics to some examples. So you need to be ready to give me examples and to show how the theory would apply. How would it apply to matters of human life and death, for example, when it comes to cloning and embryo research? And how would it apply to matters of non-human life and death when it comes to matters such as food, experiments, sports, organ transplants, and even blood sports as well? So thank you very much for joining me. I hope that's been helpful. I need a long lie down. I'm sure you do as well. Good luck with your studies. I'll see you here on the channel again soon for some more A-level revision. Until then, bye-bye. And get reasoning, get contemplating, focus on that eudaimonia. Take care. Bye-bye.